Hello and welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're able to join us for the Complexity Leadership Member Forum. I'm Dr. Cynthia Sims, and we're so glad that you're here, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So what is the certificate all about? It's about growing your capacity. It's a scholarly approach to research and practice to support your own learning and development, support the learning and development of people and organizations, and of course, to support a more equitable and just society. The faculty associated with the program is Dr. Karen Watkins, Dr. Henrietta Lundgren, Dr. Leaky Nicolaides, and myself, Dr. Cynthia Sims. So the agenda today is welcome, a brief meet and greet. So if you wouldn't mind just putting your name in the chat, we're going to talk a little bit about upcoming events. We're going to have a wonderful panel presentation, and then we're going to wrap up. So because of time, I would really love to have us spend some time together, but I know you all, like myself, would really like to get into our presentations. So if you just would like to put into chat, just say hello to one another and put in 2 words about your leadership interest, what's going on in leadership for yourself, 2 words in chat, and we can meet and greet one another in the chat form that way today. That would be wonderful. Okay. All right. And while we'll do that, we will keep moving forward. All right. So these are our certificate members. So if you see your name here, we're glad you're part of the certificate. If your name is not here and you're interested in learning about the certificate, let us know. We'd be happy to answer questions. This is the program of study associated. So the certificate program consists of 6 courses. There are required courses as well as elective courses. You can see here that there are 5 required courses and 1 elective course. And so if you have questions about that, let us know. And some of the courses that are coming up, for example, this summer we have an adaptive leadership course that Dr. Nicolaides is teaching, and an intercultural workplace course. That's an advanced topic course that I'm teaching this summer. This is a new course that I am rolling out. I'm pleased it's a special topics course until it is going to be finalized and put into the curriculum. So this course is going to be an e-course. Would love to have you enroll in the course. So it's really talking about how one leads effectively within the intercultural workplace. And so it is going to talk about intercultural initiatives that require learning, development, and change, and how leaders are needed to guide these efforts. It uses readings, inventories, reports, and group mentoring. Students will develop learning interventions to increase their individual and group level intercultural and leadership competency. It is based off of and uses the intercultural development inventory as well as the intercultural conflict style inventory. The course has been proven to actually increases one intercultural development inventory. So if you're interested, please consider enrolling. If you have questions, reach out to me. as well as adaptive leadership. Dr. Nicolaides, would you like to say anything about this course?
Hi everybody. What I'd like to say is that we're shifting it. We're playing with structure and form. So this summer I'm going to lead it as a workshop. I have a couple of special guests who are going to join me in our synchronous live Zoom sessions, and then the rest of it will be asynchronously facilitated. But I think it'll be perfect for the days that we are living in. So I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you. All right. So an upcoming event that we're having on April 22nd as part of the Generative Learning and Complexity Lab event is Discerning Together a Path into the Future with Dr. David McCallum. So please look for more information about that. We'd love to have you there as we conclude the semester. All right. So we're going to now focus on the panel discussion at hand. So we really wanted to have something for the complexity leadership students, the students enrolled in the program. And so this forum really provides you with an opportunity to see how complexity leadership frameworks can be applied to really address real world challenges. Panelists will have their research projects, methodology, and will share their research projects, methodology, and problem-solving approaches. And the presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. So we've allotted about 10 minutes for each panelist to give a presentation. And so we'll turn it over to them. So if you could hold your questions to the end, and then we'll just open it up and have a general Q&A session. Feel free to ask questions, and then we'll conclude this session. So hopefully that format works. And feel free, if you've got questions in the interim, you can put those in chat and then we can have those. So we have a great set of panelists. We've got Neil Herr, we've got Kevin Yakowitz, we've got Maggie Schmidt, and we've got Ray Shen He with us today. And so I'm going to start with Wei Shen. We'll do Margaret, and then Kevin, and then Neil. All right, so I am going to stop sharing, and we'll go first with Wei Shen, then Maggie, then Kevin, and then Neil. All right.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm personally very fond of the idea of complexity and complexity thinking, and then everything about the research project that I did for my doctoral dissertation is thinking in complexity. So I'm really glad that I am part of this lab today, and then I'm really, really happy to share with you my thinking, and then would love to invite you to think with me. So let me share my screen. So can you all see well? So my research is basically a case study. So I reached out to a Atlanta-based company, which is a pretty large size organization. Unfortunately, after several phases of emerge, acquisition, and then change of the owners. So it just had really, really like big trouble in the finance. So they went through the Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And then after that, they had recruit a new team of senior leadership. And then that senior leadership took over the organization and then started to build a new, like sort of a new organization under their leadership. So my research is to look at how this leadership can lead this organization and turn this organization around. That is their goal in turning this organization around and gaining profit and slowly picking up the market share. Basically, the background of my research is about organizational change. I can see, like after all the literature, I can see a lot of change models and then change models that apply to different cases. However, we still see statistics that's quite troubling, and then it's like require a lot of thinking about why this model failed and why all this effort of change management fail. So I have several statistics that can help us to think about why do we need a new way of thinking in organizational change. Basically, 100% of the C-suite leaders anticipate change, like in the near future, in their organizations. However, only a few of them consider they have the capacity or confident enough to lead the change. So that is why I want to study how do we actively navigate change in times of complexity and uncertainty. The purpose of my study is just to study how organization can lead effectively to help navigate the change during the times of uncertainty. There are basically 3 research questions in my study, and then yes, 2 of them are about leadership. I guess we are going to have a fun time talking about leadership today. I look into how leadership make meaning of organizational change that they've been experiencing, and also basically what is their role in leading change in this volatile environment. My study basically want to really test out complexity thinking and also complex adaptive system, and also integrate complex leadership theory in looking at how this problem can be understood in a very different paradigm compared to other traditional linear change management thinking. I also have, after the research, I also have like thinking in change management, which is very, very exciting for me, and also leadership development. These are the theoretical framework, which I just mentioned. I conducted a single qualitative case study. I interviewed executive leaders in this organization who are very seasoned, and then they are recruited based on their previous experience and engagement with these organizations. Some of them had previous engagement with this organization, and some are new to this organization. All of the interviews were conducted via Zoom meetings, and then they lasted around 40 minutes to 60 minutes. I think the findings are really interesting. I have to, when I was sorting out my findings, I have to put it in different levels. I started to look in to see the themes on individual, teams, organization, and leadership level emerge. Leadership is absolutely a very important layer of this of the findings of my research, as it was everywhere. Like in individual development, talent development, organization development, also the team dynamics, there are leadership everywhere. I just feel like the topic of today is really significant. During the leadership level, I found that there are several themes that are very prevalent. The first one is the critical competencies of leadership while they lead the change and hold the people together and foster buy-in during the time of crisis. And also some core approaches of leading the change, for example, communication skills and also empowerment and building trust during the organization. And lastly is how they understand the role of being a leader in leading the change. I'm going to share some of the parts of the findings. These are very interesting when I look at this figure. This is the core competencies that leaders think they consider that it's very important during the time of change. We can see the first one is making like quick decisions. They are very open about the history of the organization. It's kind of a mess because the leadership just change all the time, and then they really have to make sense of what is happening, what is the problem in a really efficient way, which means they have to make decisions fast, or they are gonna they're going to lose their advantage in the market or even not be able to pick up the market share. So decision making is one of the most critical competencies in leadership during times of crisis, and which gave a connection into sense making, because sense making support the foundation of making decision based on what is happening in the reality. So sense making is really a big part in my research too, and I found it really, really interesting. The second is the core leadership approaches during the times of crisis. So when I talk to the leaders, they are very consistent in what they think is really important in communicating the change, leading the change, helping the people to understand what is going on. So they propose a very, I think it's a very interesting framework called ETA. So ETA stands for empowerment, trust, and accountability. So they are all in the approaches that in this figure that they are all shown in this figure. And finally, I study the role of, I study the role of leadership during their turnaround time. So it's very interesting because in this time, all of the leaders mention leadership's role as a stabilizer. So which makes me think that in complexity, we need stabilizer in times of change, in times of uncertainty, to make sure they provide necessary guidelines, basic principle, and also support and resources to help people to move forward. So as a stabilizer, it doesn't mean the leaders are over micromanaging and asserting power. Instead, they facilitate and enable the organization members to connect and to collaborate, and also offer a direction of how to get support. And another aspect that I found that can relate to complexity leadership is the leaders in this organization really have put a lot of effort in cultivating adaptive leaders. So one of their strategy of leading the change is, I summarize it as an influencer-led strategy. So they realize after all those changes of the leadership and then the structure in the organization, so the members can basically divide it into 3 different groups. So the first one is against the change. So they are like fight against whatever they ask you, the leadership asked them to do. The second one is a middle group. They are basically silent, but they are flexible and open to new ideas, but they just not show like in a very positive way. And lastly is a supporting group. So whatever the leadership, sorry, I think isn't my time's up. Okay, so whatever the leadership told them, and they are all supportive. So based on this division of the groups, the leadership would think that let's find some explorative individuals in the middle group, and then let's cultivate them, and then let's empower them, and let's ask them to be the leaders and influence their peers. So the leadership is actually empowering these individuals and then provide them as extra support, and then guide them to build a system or a structure for the peers to seek help and support. So in this way, the executive leaders are able to cultivate adaptive leaders, as well as they are executing the enabling and facilitating influence in this organization. I think yes. So that is my research, and then I am very excited, very happy about what I found, and then because it gives me a lot of thinking about how we can apply complexity thinking into organizational change, and I really appreciate you and being part of my exploration. Thank you very much.
Sorry to have rushed you, but that was fabulous, and I want to hear so much more about it. So, all right, well, form those questions, put those in chat as we now transition to Maggie.
Hi. So I don't have any slides to share, but I hopefully have a really juicy story to share about a case study that came my way this semester. I chose not to do a complexity capstone project on my dissertation because this really interesting opportunity came my way this semester. So my complexity capstone is about navigating workplace volatility. Basically, there is a department at a four-year college in the southeastern United States where I know a lot of the faculty, and I previously served in that department, so I have a lot of backstory and sort of institutional knowledge about the context. So what's happened is basically you have two departments, physical education and exercise science, that were forced into a merger. And this happened back in 2019. And since then, the power struggles between departments and the faculty members have really shifted. Where they're now, they're sort of like warring with each other. And so, give you more of the context, physical education at this college served at the gen ed level, and exercise science is more of degree pathway where you have faculty who are in these research fields, into kinesiology. And when the institution merged them, it was out of this new policy stating that all faculty members had to be serving in a department that had degree programs. Okay, so the chair of the department at the time entered, in an effort to sort of like welcome everybody in together into this new dynamic of all these different faculty, said, okay, well, we're all seen as equals now, and we're all going to be as one. They changed the name of the department to like exercise science and phys ed. The problem with that is that because they serve two totally different purposes, and exercise science faculty are paid much more, they have much more opportunity, they have different goals for themselves in academia, whereas gen ed is mostly made up of like coaches, and I think there's one person that has a PhD. Anyway, because this college is state, a state institution, people were able to see everybody's salaries and to see the difference in salaries and the opportunities. And so the idea that like we're all one now was simply not something that they could, really do, like put into practice. And so you had physical education faculty complaining that why can't they teach the exercise science classes? Why do they get paid so much less? What can we do about this? Like there's no, terminal degree pathway for me. So like there was a lot of resentment on both sides about being forced to merge together. And so over time, my previous experience with the phys ed faculty before the departments merged was that there was some, fighting among the colleagues. Over time, now that they have like this new common enemy, the phys ed faculty has sort of banded together. And right now they're under leadership of a very like authoritarian chair. They had like a change in leadership, power dynamic shifted, authoritarian chair is where they're at. And so over time, I've heard like a lot of drama about what was going on in the department. And what's interesting is having left the department right at the merger, and keeping in touch with some of the faculty and hearing all the drama about, how it's getting worse. I've also been able to interact with other faculty that have different perspectives and are telling different stories about what's happening in the department. And so now I have this sort of like observer view of like, wow, there's all this drama going on, but nobody's really talking to each other. So how this opportunity like presented itself to me is for a really good capstone project is not too long ago, I gave a presentation where the chair, the authoritarian, leader of that department was, she was in the audience of my presentation. It was all about developing adaptive leadership capacity on students in our programs and like, what are the things that we need to lean into? I talked about shared governance, and after the presentation, I got to meet with her and she said, wow, I really enjoyed your presentation. It's very clear to me that like I have a lot of room to grow in leadership. And, it really spoke to me personally because I'll be the first to admit that I don't have these skills. And I thought that was really great because the narrative around her is that she's unable to change, like this woman's a bitch, she's like, she's a narcissist, all this. But I was experiencing something very different in that moment with her. So I decided to explore this a little further, ask some questions, talk with other faculty about perspectives, and decided to interview. I actually first asked the chair if she'd be willing to let me interview her about this, which she denied. But I was able to convince a physical education faculty member who I felt was on the more like unbiased side of things, to interview her and reciprocate with, could I give you some amateur complexity leadership coaching? Because I'm learning about it. She said, sure. So this was like a new opportunity for me to lean in to the literature and what I'm learning about complexity leadership, to sort of analyze it from, the interview from that lens, but also, what can I make of this that would be, would serve her, and thank you, navigating workplace volatility. So it became clear after all of this, data I had in talking with different faculty that they're telling different stories. There's a lot that resonates with Berger and Johnston's what they call leadership mind traps. There's a book they have called Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps about like the desire for a simple story. It's very clear that the chair does not have leadership skills, and those serving underneath her don't know how to respond to that. And so, offering the opportunity for emergence, there's a lot from complexity leadership that's new for me. It's really interesting in that it suggests like embracing what emerges rather than trying for like these, very like prescriptive things to do, like these prescriptive strategies, for example, like opening to disagreement. Like, part of what's happening in the departments is that they're finding each other who agree with each other, right? So like they're very siloed because they don't want to lean into that discomfort that comes in having difficult conversations, or even accepting an alternative viewpoint of like, maybe this woman really isn't this big horrible bitch who's a narcissist. Maybe there's some other stories that are going on there about insecurity and all the other things that she's trying. She's not feeling respected. Helping faculty see like what responsibility do they actually hold in this whole scenario versus just being a victim, right, to this one person and how they're behaving. Some other things that came out was checking themselves in terms of like they think that they're right. Like one of the leadership mind traps that I think a lot of us do is that we get caught in our own egos and our own minds, and we forget that there is always the opportunity for curiosity about what else could be going on. One of the strategies that Berger and Johnston say is like try to create at least 3 other different stories about what's going on. Super powerful. I see that I've got 1 minute left, but basically, in a nutshell, my complexity project is all about looking at what are the strategies that are recommended in the literature from people who really understand complexity, and how could we use them to help people navigate ambiguous, volatile situations that provide a lot of discomfort in our lives. I think I'll stop there. I think I'm out of time. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Maggie. That sounds like a really wonderful, challenging situation.
It's fun.
All right. So next is Kevin, and then we'll hear from Neil.
Thank you. Okay, I just popped a document in chat, and you feel free to download it. It's actually my textbook for my next Maymester class. And instead of giving you a whole bunch of background on creative problem solving and innovation, I'd just rather you had that. You can look at it at your own leisure. So when I got to the end of the complexity leadership certificate, or the complexity certificate, I found myself realizing that I knew far less than I thought I did, even though I knew more than I used to. It's such a it's a broad field, right? And those of you in the certificate know this. There's so much to cover, and I'm fascinated and still fascinated with things like warm data and the Nora Bateson's approach to semathestes, right? And contrasting that with a systems view, which really implies it's more contained, more predictable. And so dealing with complexity as someone who spent most of their career as a practitioner in change management and organization development is both exciting and frightening for me. I, this idea of how do I transmit or how do I teach complexity without reducing it to its component parts, which absolutely destroys it as complexity, it has been something I've really wrestled with. And I was in that context, I was presented with an opportunity to teach MBA students at Kennesaw State, where I'm currently limited term. And I love my MBA students. I adore my MBA students. They're everything from traditional to non-traditional. They're people that really want to improve their ability to lead in organizations. But they think like MBA students, right? Here's a problem. Okay, what's the formula? How do I fix it? Give me the answer. Let's move on. And to break them of those habits gently, lovingly, in the context of support is often a difficult thing. I don't propose what I'm going to talk about here as the answer to complexity. It is a approach. It is a singular approach to complexity, and that is using creative problem solving. Creative problem solving being the process and tools that come out of the Creative Education Foundation. Scholars like Ruth Noller, Sid Parnes, the originator of brainstorming, Alex Osborne, and folks like that, and now currently at Buffalo State, where they have some really, really remarkable scholarship and education going on around creativity. And that's why I gave you the book. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Basically, you can boil down the process to 4 steps. You clarify. You say, okay, what is the real problem we're trying to solve here? And you do that by applying data to the problem. What do we know about it? What should we know about it? The next step is what we typically think about is creativity, which is ideation, coming up with new ideas. The step beyond that is then developing those ideas, everything from risk management to prototyping to those types of tools. And then finally, how do we implement it? How do we get it going? That process is something that I've taught in several classes, but the opportunity that I had and that I chose to do my capstone on was teaching a course to MBA students that had them applying these tools to a wicked problem. And that's the Riddle and Weber definition of wicked. A problem that is ill-defined, that even trying to tackle the problem leads to new problems. The classic nailing Jello to the wall type of challenge. So we had live clients come in, and I really appreciated that they were willing to share their challenges with us. This last semester, I had a young man from Brazil who had an established information systems company in Brazil, and he wanted to gain a foothold in North America, but the cultures were different and the practices were different, even the laws were different. And so for him, this was a very complex truly wicked problem. We also had a family-owned organic farm. They were literally growing produce in people's yards and selling it, and had a successful business. But the challenge was, how do we get out of the field and replicate this in other places? Non-traditional growth, right? We don't necessarily want to scale this up. We just want other people to be able to do it. Again, a very complex, very abstract, nobody's ever done this before type of problem. So my students were able to wrestle with these. And I think a lot of the value in this is not the process or the approach, but the fact that they had hands-on experience trying to navigate complex problems. Now, there's two things that are coming out of this. One is the capstone, just kind of an initial, what are people learning? How are they changing? And we know from Keegan that when we're faced with a challenge, we can either try to simplify that challenge or we can complexify ourselves. And my goal was to try to get these wonderful MBA students and their lovely linear thinking to complexify a little bit, right? Don't just go for the first answer. Just don't go for the first challenge or the first. And this fits, by the way, this fits the CPS process very well because the clarification process implies that the first challenge you see is probably not your real challenge, right? The first thing that comes to mind is probably not really the answer that you need to drive towards, or there's very little chance of that. And if you drive towards that and you come up with an elegant solution to something that's not the real problem, you've created absolutely zero value, right? So how to explore, how to sit with the problem, how to live with the paradox. Those of you who have taken courses from Dr. Sims and Dr. Nicolaides are very familiar with this, right? Sit with the paradox and sit with that notion. The fun part, and Aliki challenged me. She said, okay, do this, but I want you to report back what are your students reporting their growth was, their change was. And that was the glorious part of this, I think, I asked them to do a 2-page reflective essay after the experience and tell me, no right answers here, just what was your experience? And I started seeing things that were truly reflective of transformative learning. People saying, I will never look at problem solving the same way again. I will not look at business challenges the same way again. I learned something about myself in the process and the way I tackle problems. And other statements like, I realized I need to sit with problems longer and spend more time marinating in them and not just jump to the first answer. So seeing that kind of response was really rewarding. Boy, it's tough. I teach a 40-hour intensive course on this stuff, and it's hard not to go down a rabbit trail right now. Those of you who know me know that that's where I usually go anyway. But so that's Leaky's like, yep. So that's the experience. That's the capstone. I think the punchline here is if you have something you're interested in, you have something you're passionate about, there is a way to tie it back into this certificate. And I would encourage you to do that, not say, okay, what is the research out there that I need to learn? But I found it very rewarding to say, what am I working on now? And how can complexity inform what I'm doing? And then improve what either as my corporate work, my consulting work, my teaching, any of those things. So I still don't think I know much yet. I know more than I did, but I'm learning. So thank you.
Wonderful application. Thanks so much for sharing. Looking forward to learning more. Okay. All right. Last but not least, Neil.
We'll see about that. Hey, great to see you all. I put a presentation together, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to talk. I think that'll be better. So what I did for my capstone project is I called it Sustaining Pastoral Resilience, a leadership cohort for pastors and ministry leaders. So many of you know that I was a pastor for 13 years prior to starting my studies here in Georgia. And I started August 2020, so right during the pandemic. And we moved from Michigan to Georgia so I could take online classes for a year and a half. And then, but so much of that context really informed my interest in this project and then my interest really throughout the program as well. As I was observing what churches were doing amidst the pandemic, I was both dismayed and not surprised. Because a lot of them were longing to go back to the way things were rather than using the pandemic as an opportunity to learn, to grow as an organization, to change, to adapt to what they've been doing. And so that really got me thinking as it relates to this project. And the big question for me was, how can I equip church leaders to respond to uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity in ways that glorify God and edify their neighbors? So those are really the two uh, main commandments that Jesus teaches: to love God and to love your neighbor. And so that's the kind of the context that I was aiming for here, is how can churches better do that in this environment of complexity and uncertainty? There's a pastor scholar named Michael Cooper who says, the reality is that the 21st century church looks like a 19th century congregation applying an ecclesiology from the 16th century in a context that is increasingly like the first century. And I mean, that says an absolute mouthful, but I completely, wholeheartedly agree. Um, if those from the outside of the church in particular um, can often see the church as judgmental, as hypocritical. We're living at a time when I think the faith in any institution is dwindling quite a bit, and religious institutions are certainly among that. There was a time uh, in like the 1940s and 50s where religious leaders were well respected and thought trustworthy. That's no longer broadly the case. So the context has changed quite a bit. I reflected back on my seminary education, and um, and reflecting back, I think my seminary education prepared me to lead a church that no longer exists. And so much of what this cohort that I developed is about is kind of filling some of those gaps. Um, So the kind of the purpose of the cohort then is to enlarge the capacity of pastors and ministry leaders to lead themselves, systems, and society, particularly when faced with uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. My goal for this, or some of the values that kind of led me to develop what I did, I want to challenge conventional notions of pastoral leadership. Um, Two things in particular come to mind. One is the model of a pastor or priest as CEO of a church. So most churches are structured in a way that there is one primary leader, usually a man, along with a leadership group in many traditions composed only of men leading the congregation. And so troubling that to really center relationality and uh, understanding that a command and control type of leadership is really only works in times of chaos. In a chaotic situation, you need a kind of command and control kind of leadership. But other than that, to me, it has to really all be about relationships. Really, and then also challenging the predominant leadership theory that has made its way into churches, which is servant leadership. Um, Again, any leader-centric model, including servant leadership, sets the singular leader up as the messiah of an organization. And I think that's particularly dangerous in a church context. Um, and so it's so the servant leadership model is so prevalent. It is probably a little risque to even challenge that. But that's exactly what my intent would be. And then really seeing leadership as a process as well. So the kind of the logistics of the cohort I developed, it's 10 months long from September to June. There are 3 retreats spread throughout in October, January, and April. The cohort starts out with a kind of an online Zoom meeting with all the participants to kind of kick things off. And then any week, any month where there is not a retreat, they would meet in small groups of 3 to 4 people to engage the material further from the retreat, but also their homework assignments. They're also called to put together a personal reflection team of 4 to 5 people from their church or ministry organization, so that when they come back from these retreats, they have a team to process that with and hopefully begin implementing some things that they've been learning as well. And so that's how the leadership retreats are divided up is the first one is all about leadership of self. The second is about leadership of systems, and then the last one is leadership in society. So that fall retreat is sort of the kickoff, and uh, participants will come into that having done a number of assessments and answering a questionnaire. My denomination has done this in several contexts where sort of they use all of this to compile a document that a therapist then goes over with each participant. And so that would be my intent in this as well, is to have a conversation that hopefully that person can really dig into each individual leader and the wounds from their past, their tendencies in leadership, and all kinds of things I think can surface within that environment. Uh, a big piece of this retreat as well is developing a rule of life. This is something that's prominent in uh, many traditions. Um, the earliest being from Saint Basil in the third or fourth century, I believe. But Benedictines and many traditions use this as a way of, it's really a set of practices and relational rhythms to help create a space in our lives for what's most important to us. I think that's how I would probably describe it. And so kind of developing that, I would use Theory U as well, and the journal as one of the assignments coming out of this retreat. And then a pretty large portion of this retreat would be an immunity to change workshop and helping individuals work through Keegan and Leahy's work with that. The winter retreat is about leadership of systems and really seeing the church as a complex adaptive system. They take an assessment called the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, which talks about how one engages in conflict. So again, we're talking about leadership in terms of relationality. And so how we engage in conflict and knowing that about ourselves, what our defaults are, is very important as you think about that in leadership. We would go through an adaptive case study, the Cynefin framework, and so how do we make decisions in complex environments, and creating a culture of development in the church. And I'm using an everyone culture for that. And then using the immunity change again for organizations. And then finally, the last retreat. This is a little ambitious, I think, but the majority of this retreat would be doing a world building workshop. And so we did world building for a number of courses with Aliki, but taking really a lot of different complexity principles to address major issues. Ann Pendleton Julian and John Seeley Brown have used it to address things like homelessness and climate change. So these ginormous issues. My intent, and I've been playing with this for a little bit since I first took the course, and but doing it as a way of doing community development. And so the workshop would be intended to help pastors to engage in their communities in a holistic way in addressing some of the major challenges that they see within their communities. And I would use the human ecology framework from UVA as sort of a framework for human flourishing, and for them to think about what does it mean for really individuals and our community to be flourishing. So that's sort of the main piece of this, and I think I'm out of time. A lot of my personal reflection came around those fall retreat activities, and I'm happy to answer questions or speak more to that if you're interested. But that gives you a kind of sense of what I did for the capstone. Thank you.
Fabulous. We have 4 very diverse set of applications of complexity. So wonderful. So let's just open it up. Questions for these wonderful presenters on their projects.
Hi, everyone. That was so great to hear. Thank you for sharing um, all your good, rigorous, hard work. Um, Neil, as you were talking about challenging the servant leadership model in churches, it reminded me of Michael Newman's article on transformative learning, some mutinous thoughts. And I thought, oh, the mutinous thoughts of a different kind of leadership in the church context. And it made me wonder, for those of you who had applied kinds of projects, did you encounter any resistance or challenges in bringing this new perspective in maybe a context that is used to something different?
The resistance I experienced was at the individual level. Um, I was fortunate enough that the program let me experiment a little bit, but the students really struggled, I think, with not falling back on their familiar tools, their analytical tools, their Six Sigma and lean mindsets, right? That they jump to that answer. And in many cases, it's that certainty, right? That comfort and certainty of going back to tools I'm familiar with. Um, Encouraging them to sit there and float around in the ether was probably the most difficult thing. And this was even in a population of students that desired this kind of learning. They sought out this course because they wanted a different way to approach problems, and yet their habits of the mind were very strong. And of course, I identify that with that. That was the challenge. That's where resistance sat.
Kevin, I could be one of your students. I think your research kind of resonates with me. I am a systems person. I've been in corporate and all kinds. Everybody pretty much knows my story here, especially our teachers, for a very long time, decades. And I find complexity kind of this squishy, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's attractive, but I struggle. And I'm looking through the lens of your students and knowing that they want this, because that would be me. I want it. I want to understand it. I want to be able to rethink problems. And my question to you is, I know you're still in it with these students. Do you see yourself developing more content that speaks to people like me who want the change, but really struggle with grasping what that means?
I am continually developing the course based on student feedback and what happened the semester before. And what is really exciting are when my students come to me and say, "Oh, well, I found this resource, I found this article that I can include." Um, to one of the implications in your question there, um, this stuff's got to be fed back to organizations in bite-sized chunks. The adaptive leadership class, and they're not paying me to say this, the adaptive leadership class is one you really, really, really should take if you haven't already. This notion of I can push the system so far before it will reject me and spit me out. Helping students develop that feeling for how far, how fast, in what ways can I push the system to evolve without getting so far out of field that I get rejected by the system. I think that's something that I would like to spend even more time on in the future is how do we develop a feeling for that? And sometimes it's a matter of translating, using different language for these concepts that's more familiar. Words like creativity and innovation are just abused beyond any meaning, but you still have to use them. You still have to go into an organization. Okay, we're going to help you innovate. And I cringe a little bit, and but then introduce them to the process and the tools and the mindsets that you want to introduce.
Can I respond to, oh, go ahead.
No, Maggie, go ahead.
I was just going to say something in response to Ali's question about the resistance. In my case study and in having conversations with faculty, something that emerged was, especially among the phys ed faculty, was this fixed mindset, like this resistance to the growth mindset, like this is who I am. So to give you an example, in offering a suggestion for an alternative way of responding, versus being very like retaliatory or reacting before pausing and thinking about what would be the most beneficial for all parties involved. Like, well, that's just who I am. Like, no, if you're going to come at me with this, I'm going to do this. And so asking that question of like, well, maybe this was me before, like who else might I want to become? Like that there's this opportunity that maybe you could do something different and grow, right? Your leadership capacity. There was like a resistance there of like, no, like this is who I am and I'm not going to change. And then, assuming that other people also can't change, like that's who she is and she's not willing to change. She's not going to. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me of one of the other mind traps, tied to who I think I am, prevents me from growing. And so tied to our ego, who we think we are now, prevents us from who we might become. Yeah.
I love the question and I really appreciate your presentations. And I particularly appreciate that many of you did not use slides, not to say, Wei-Shen, you shouldn't have used slides. They were great. But I think that it's really, in the context of complexity, there are no systems. That's the paradox. And we can't think systemically because we actually misunderstand what a system is in a complex context. Because in a complex context, the most powerful system is me. So the only place for change is here. And when that combining of, and I love Kevin and Neil and Maggie, that you're really playing with the internal movements of systems, right? Identities, concepts of self, ways of knowing and doing and being. That's where the beginning is. And I just appreciate your willingness to work in these, seemingly micro ways for macro emergence, right? Which you can never predict, you cannot foreknow, you can't know the future. None of us can. And that's the distinction, I would say, between complexity leadership and then any other kind of leadership that attempts to predict and control the future. There is no such thing. And I think, the willingness of leadership theory to let go of 150 years of leadership, that's a really heavy ask, but that's exactly what needs to happen, right? We got to let go of the command. I mean, every leadership theory on the known planet has some element of predictability and control baked into it. And unfortunately, even servant leadership. So I think your projects are really exciting because they start to signal different directions that inquiry can take. And I love the beginnings that you have. So thank you for your willingness to step into the complexity and sit in it.
And with that, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. It is 1 o'clock. I'd like to thank our wonderful presenters, of everyone who just joined me in thanking them and for their wonderful work on complexity and being such great role models in terms of what you can do. And if you all have questions, we're happy to answer those in terms of if you're interested in learning more. And give a shout out. Please feel free to follow up with me. I'll put my name in the chat. in terms of email. But other than that, thank you so much. Best wishes, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll stay on if you have questions. But thank you so much. Best wishes.